Talofa it's Tim Tafunga. It's what's today? Tuesday, January the 21st. I just had a live stream just earlier and it's just got cut off. So I'm going to do it again. What am I talking about today? Samoan politics, for the obvious reasons as the political crisis seems to have been set aside for the time being, whilst they've reopened Parliament this morning. And I was sitting and watching the parliamentary debates in Samoa. Interestingly, there was no reference to the caucus, to the FAST caucus decision to enforce the vote of no confidence to the Samoan Prime Minister. And as it turns out, Samoan politics is like Samoan cricket. It's not cricket. Now, Samoans do their cricket, play cricket, but the Samoan cricket is different from the English cricket or the cricket that we know of here in Australia or New Zealand or America or wherever. If you play cricket, Samoan cricket is different. Now, Samoan politics is like cricket. Samoans do what they want to do, and they don't care what the Westminster system is all about. Now, take for example, caucus. The Samoan caucus made a decision to remove the cabinet portfolios of the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and the Minister for Police, and other important portfolios of the executive branch of government. As it turns out, the FAST executive, as it were, meaning the Speaker of the House, had not endorsed and proceeded with the FAST caucus decision to remove the Prime Minister as it is for the present moment. Now, during the session and the reopening of Parliament for 2025, the Prime Minister was back in her position, and more importantly, all the sitting members of Parliament within the Samoan Parliament referred to her as the Prime Minister. Now that's important, because if you refer to her as the Prime Minister, then obviously caucus politics and party politics is subsumed by the Samoan version of cricket. Now, that also includes the fact that party politics is subsumed by the majority of those who are in Parliament. So that includes the HRPP kicking in their level of influence and shoulder charging their way, as Samoans often are renowned for, in order to assert their dominance within the House. The unicameral parliamentary system of Samoa often will have very loud and influential speakers in parliaments that will drown out all other spheres of influence, even to the point that one could call someone a Philistine and everyone else would just stop and debate the issue of referring to a member as a Philistine amongst the people of Jerusalem, as it were. Now, Samoan politics is like the Trump administration. They've demonstrated that the blurring of power and American presidential system is different from the Westminster system. The Westminster system is that each ituma law or constituency has voted in their member of parliament. Therefore, all members of parliament are equal as members within the unicameral parliament of Samoa. Only when the caucus nominates their various cabinet ministers and associate ministers, and then thus the prime minister. Then you have the pecking order of the cabinet and the executive branch of government. Of course, the executive branch includes the Council of Deputies, the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and the various cabinet ministers, as well as the head of state. So you have Council of Deputies, or Fautua, the head of state himself. So the Fautua are made up of the Te Maohaina. Now, these are the princes, or the amalgamated chieftains of Samoan society. Now, these are the Tuia Ana, the Tuia Tua, the Tupua Tamasese, and Maliatoa, and Mataafa, and so forth. What is that is, I would consider as the equivalent to the House of Lords or the Privy Council of the British system. So the House of Lords, Samoa does not have a House of Lords, but as it is, once it had a Matai suffrage, which meant that only Matais become members of Parliament. But in 1993, Samoa introduced the universal suffrage, which meant that the awaluma male aumanga, which is the untitled hoi polloi, or the voting population, were able to cast the vote. And in so doing, with universal suffrage, everyone has a democratic right as citizenry of Samoa to vote for Parliament over the age of 18. So that's universal suffrage in Samoa. Now, in the meantime, Samoans have party politics almost like a communist one-party system for a very long time, because all these minor parties were basically independents who were marginalized and had no power whatsoever. Now, the HRPP was founded by Kolonge Va'ai from my neck of the woods in Asau in Vaisala, and he uprooted himself from Vaisala to Whangalii, and there he established himself with his businesses and so forth. In fact, his land, his business enterprises in Asau included the Ili, in which is on my ancestral land. The Ili is in Utuloa in Asau. That's my traditional homeland. And the wharf, which has been recently discussed with Tule Epa, with the Chinese government, in order to construct a port constructed by the Chinese. That port is actually on my land, on my ancestral land, as the Satufunga and Lopo'o there in Utuloa. So my family is there. They say g'day to them in Utuloa, and also in Matavai. And obviously my tufunga is from Matavai. So that's my family, but there's a lot of branches of tufunga that we don't even know each other, but we are kin of sorts. Okay, the point is that we have linkages to families in Samoa, although I'm not a Samoan, right? I'm ethnically a Samoan. I was born in New Zealand, brought up in Australia and New Zealand, and I'm not a Samoan, if you can't tell by my accent. Now, I've lived in Samoa for a period with my father, only for a couple of months or a couple of years. I lived in Tokmatangi, in my father's house, right in that corner, next to the National University of Samoa in Papaingalingala. My father passed away in 2015. I'm one of the founding members of the HRPP, alongside with Kolonge Va'ai and the original founders of the HRPP party. Now, he passed away, right? Now, he's gone. Now, there's no more connection whatsoever with myself, with any political affiliations with Samoa. A couple of rugby players I used to play with there in Skopa and Singming Raiders. Now they're in ministers, they're in the HRPP government. You know who I am, and I know who you are. So been watching your political careers for a number of years and been following it, and my relatives who are involved in Parliament there in Samoa. So I do have some kind of connections, little connection. So the point is that I've seen a few things going on. I do understand the politics. I get a lot of hate. I get a lot of derisive, disparaging rebukes and retorts and a lot of whatever. But I bat along. All right, I carry on. I roll with the punches. Okay, what I like to talk about is also the recent the whole situation of how people tend to move the goalposts in politics. Now, the Samoan system tends to move the goalposts like Samoan cricket. So, whilst you have party politics with caucus and so forth, where they have, supreme power here in Australia and New Zealand, like New Zealand Labor Party, if they get rid of somebody in the New Zealand Labor Party, you're gone. And you're not in power. You can't stay in Parliament. You have to sit as an independent. And as an independent, you have no power whatsoever. You don't influence the party members who form caucus, who form government. Samoa, it's the complete opposite. What we have seen is a kind of unique relations with Fiame and the old HRPP. Now, as it turns out, the old HRPP are sort of like spinning their little webs of intrigue within the Parliament and making sure that Fiame stays in power as the sitting member of Parliament, as well as the current Prime Minister of Samoa, for the time being. Okay, we've still got the pending criminal proceedings of Lauli scheduled for February the 4th. Whatever that outcome will be is, God knows what that is all about. But as it were, he is presumed innocent until proven guilty. So we'll let it ride until then. But as parliamentary procedures would dictate, you must step aside as a cabinet minister pending a criminal proceedings, because as a cabinet minister, you have parliamentary privilege to protect you from whatever criminal proceedings. Now, again, that's the separation of powers. Now, the judiciary can't tell the legislature that you're going to go to, and be indicted for a crime or whatever. You will not be, protected by the Parliament once the government distance themselves from a member of Parliament who no longer is a cabinet minister, whilst a criminal proceedings is being dealt with through the judiciary. Now, that's the separation of powers, as it were, with the judiciary. Interestingly enough, the Samoan government has a lot of issues with the caucus issues, where they're going to the Court of Appeal. Now, they've just blurred the judiciary from the legislature. Again, the separation of powers tells them you don't dictate terms with the other. But this is Samoan cricket. So Samoan cricket is different. In Australia, if the caucus tells the executive branch of government, mate, you're out, you go to the back bench, that's the end of it. Samoa, when they're disputing an issue, they say, oh, whekawi ole whale whamasingo. Whakaola le Court of Appeals. Whakaola le whamasingo. Vai le kolanga le ma kong ma lo paroka le whakala. Whakaola e whingau i le whale whamasingo. Now, Samoans have blurred the lines of separation of powers. That's what they've done. Now, speaking of separation of powers, now we can look at the judiciary system in America. Okay, let's look at the very first executive decision made by the president. Now, unlike Samoa, the prime minister has an executive powers, but she must consult first with her caucus in parliament, with her party, before she makes an executive decision, such as, right, Lauli, you got to step aside, hit the road, right, until you have your criminal proceedings dealt with. Now, instead of doing a unilateral arbitrary decision as she did, without the consultation of the caucus of her party, that left her out in the lurch with her party, which were highly influenced by 20 or so members of parliament who gave the vote of no confidence on January the 15th, under the behest, as it were, by Lauli. So the problem with that is that, unlike the president, President Trump gave his very first executive order, which was to pardon the January 6 rioters and insurrectionists. There are something like 1,500 in prison. He set them free. Now that's the executive power of the president, because the president was directly elected by the people. The president doesn't have to go to the Republic Congress and ask the Republicans to help him to make a decision. His executive decision can overrule anyone within the Capitol Hill House, with all the representatives, House of Representatives, and even the senators. So he has that executive decision that he can bypass everyone. So his very first executive decision was to set them free. Now, that almost incriminates him for motivating them, because he's set them free. That means he's more or less taking responsibility for their welfare and setting them free and pardoning them. Now, when you do that to your MAGA people, you're basically saying that you're in cahoots with them, because you waited until you won the election to set them free, and then that gives the judiciary a real justification. But anyway, the point is that that's an example of the judiciary being overruled by the executive decision by a democratically elected president. Now, he made an executive decision. Now, that's an example of the executive having exclusive power that is separate from the judiciary. He undermined the American judicial system, and then thus the American criminal justice system. That actually makes it embarrassing for the American justice system in the eyes of the world. But that is an example of the separation of powers of the executive, which is the president, and the judiciary of America with regards to the penitentiary, the federal penitentiary imprisonment and incarceration of the J6 rioters and insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol Hill on January the 6th, 2021. Now they're free. Now, that was the very first executive order he gave to his people. Now, that's an example of how people can move the goalposts of political power. Now, that is where Lord Acton may be apt in considering that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, whether we're looking at aristocracy in the making, where dumb people voted dumb people into power, or we're looking at plutocracy, where the rich rule the world, the rich people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump can move the goalpost as they see fit is up to you to deduce yourself. So, for the time being, the Samoan political system, despite the recent upheavals, as it were, in other countries, that would have been a dramatic coup. But in Samoa, it was like a storm in a teacup. But let's leave it at that for the time being, that the political crisis in Samoa is merely a storm in a teacup because it's still status quo. They're moving the musical chairs in Samoa. We'll see what's going to transpire throughout the year. Anyway, in the meantime, I'm just sitting back and enjoying it. I'm not a Samoan, so if I'm saying things that offends the Samoan Matais and Whaiwha'els, then I apologise. So I apologise forthwith. But, as they say, lever lever foi aso. Well, for starters, I was born in Christchurch, New Zealand, back in 1968. I've never lived in Samoa. So if you say, well, lever foi aso, yeah, well, lever foi aso, I was born in Christchurch. So anyway, take care, right? Till fast